You should be grateful there's a real man in this family." The words hit the table so hard that even the waiter froze for a second. My son-in-law Jason was standing there with a whiskey glass in his hand and a grin on his face. "Seriously, Bill," he said loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "Without me, this family would fall apart." A few people at our table laughed. One of them was my own daughter. Another was my son. I remember looking around that private dining room in Las Vegas and realizing nobody seemed uncomfortable. Nobody looked shocked. It was almost as if they had all been waiting for someone to finally say it out loud. Then Jason pointed at me and said, "A 74-year-old retired man shouldn't be acting like he still matters." More laughter followed. I sat there quietly, staring at the white tablecloth while something inside me finally broke. The strange thing is, they thought that was the painful part of the story. It wasn't. The painful part was knowing what every person at that table still didn't know. Before I go any further, if this story speaks to your heart, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel, but only if this story truly resonates with you. And I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Leave your city, your country, and your local time in the comments below. My name is William Harrison. I'm 74 years old, and this is the story of the night my family discovered they had been wrong about me for years. And if you stay until the end, you'll understand the lesson that changed everything for me. Now let me take you back to where it all began. I live just outside Dallas, Texas, in a quiet neighborhood where most mornings look exactly the same. I wake up before sunrise, make coffee, sit on my back porch, and watch the sky change colors over the trees behind my house. It's not a huge house, but it's comfortable. My wife, Margaret, and I bought it nearly 30 years ago. After she passed away 5 years ago, the place became much quieter. Too quiet sometimes. The funny thing is that people think loneliness comes from being alone. It doesn't. Loneliness comes from realizing the people you love no longer see you the way they once did. At least, that's what happened to me. A few months before that dinner in Las Vegas, my daughter Emily called me. "Dad, we're having everyone over Sunday." "For what?" I asked. "Just family dinner." "Sounds good." There was a pause. "Jason wants to talk about something." I remember smiling. "Jason always wants to talk about something." She laughed nervously. "Please just come." When I arrived that Sunday, Jason was already holding court in the backyard like he owned the place. He had one arm around Emily and a beer in the other hand. "There he is," he announced. "The legend himself." A few people chuckled. I smiled politely and sat down. At first everything seemed normal. Burgers on the grill. Grandkids running around. Football playing on the outdoor television. Then the conversation drifted toward money. It always seemed to drift there whenever Jason was involved. "You know what the problem is with most people?" Jason said. "They stop contributing." He took a sip of beer. "A man should provide until the day he dies." I noticed his eyes flick toward me. Not for long. Just enough. Emily looked down at her plate. Nobody said anything. A few weeks later it happened again. Different gathering. Different joke. Same target. "Must be nice," Jason said, laughing. "Retirement sounds like a permanent vacation." "I worked 48 years, I replied. "I think I earned a little rest." "Sure," he said, "if that's what you want to call it." Everyone laughed softly. Not because it was funny. Because it was easier. That was when I started noticing something. Whenever bills came up, people looked at me. Whenever vacations were discussed, people looked at me. Whenever somebody needed help, people looked at me. But whenever respect was being handed out, nobody looked at me at all. I didn't say anything. Not then. I just watched. I listened. And the more I listened, the more I realized there was a conversation happening behind my back. A conversation nobody thought I knew about. Then one afternoon, completely by accident, I overheard something that made my stomach drop. Something that explained everything. And the person saying it was the last person in the world I expected. The voice came from the kitchen. I had not meant to overhear it. I was standing in the hallway of Emily's house looking for the restroom when I heard my daughter speaking in a low voice. "How much do you think Dad is worth now?" she asked. I stopped without thinking. There was a short pause before Jason answered. "More than enough." Then he laughed. "Honestly, Emily, we just have to be patient." My hand tightened around the hallway railing. "Patient for what?" Emily asked. Jason lowered his voice even further, but I still heard every word. "The house, the investments, whatever is left, it is all going to end up in the family eventually." I stood there for another second before quietly walking away. They never knew I heard that conversation. What hurt was not the money. It was the certainty in his voice. Like I was not a person anymore. Like I was in a state waiting to be processed. Driving home that night, I found myself thinking about something I had not thought about in years. My father used to tell me that respect was not something you demanded. It was something you earned every day. He worked at a machine shop outside Fort Worth for almost 40 years. The man rarely missed a day of work. When I was 12 years old, he bought me my first toolbox. It was red, dented on one side, and probably older than I was. Take care of your tools, he told me, and take care of your word. Both are hard to replace once broken. I still have that toolbox in my garage. Funny enough, my family never asks about things like that. They know what my house is worth. They know I sold my construction company years ago. They know I own some land outside Dallas. But none of them ever ask about the toolbox. None of them ask about the years it took to build a life. When Margaret was alive, things felt different. She had a way of keeping everyone grounded. If someone became rude, she would gently shut it down. If someone forgot their manners, she noticed. People behaved differently around her. After she passed, something slowly changed. Not all at once. Little things. Small moments. The kind you almost convince yourself are not important. One Christmas about 3 years earlier, I spent nearly $2,000 on gifts for the family. Nothing extravagant. Just things I knew they would enjoy. Olivia got a laptop for school. Michael received a new set of golf clubs he had been talking about for months. Emily got a designer handbag she had admired during a shopping trip. After everyone opened their presents, Jason looked around the room and said, "Not bad for a retiree." A few people laughed. I laughed too. What else was I supposed to do? Then he added, "Guess retirement pays better than working." That one stung a little. Not because it was cruel, because nobody told him to stop. Over time, I started noticing a pattern. Whenever I helped someone, it was expected. Whenever I said no, people seemed surprised. One afternoon, Michael called me. "Dad, can you help with a down payment?" "How much?" I asked. $10,000. I thought about it for a moment. "That is a lot of money, son." Silence filled the line. Then he said, "Forget it." His tone changed instantly, as though I had failed some kind of test. 2 days later, he called back acting like nothing had happened. I ended up helping him anyway. That was the problem. I always helped. Somewhere along the way, appreciation turned into expectation. Expectation slowly turned into entitlement. And entitlement eventually turned into something much worse. Looking back now, I think the warning signs were everywhere. The strange part is that the biggest warning did not come from Jason. It came from someone I trusted completely. And when that moment arrived, it forced me to question whether I truly knew my own family at all. The person who changed everything was Olivia. Out of everyone in the family, my granddaughter was the one person who still treated me like I was more than a checkbook. She came by the house one Saturday afternoon carrying a cardboard box full of college brochures. "Grandpa, can I get your opinion on something?" she asked. Of course. We sat at the kitchen table for nearly 2 hours. She showed me programs, tuition costs, internship opportunities, and even maps of different campuses. What struck me was that she was not asking for money. She was asking for advice. That had become surprisingly rare. Before leaving, she glanced around the house and smiled. "I like coming here." "Why?" I asked. She shrugged. "It feels peaceful." After she left, I sat there thinking about those words. Peaceful. It had been a long time since anyone in the family described my life that way. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. A business group in Dallas invited me to speak at a small event for young entrepreneurs. Apparently, one of the former employees from my construction company had recommended me. I almost declined. Public speaking was never my favorite thing. But eventually I agreed. The event was held at a hotel downtown. Nothing fancy. About 100 people attended. I talked about building a company from scratch, making mistakes, surviving recessions, and treating employees fairly. Afterward, dozens of people came up to shake my hand. One young man said, "Mr. Harrison, your advice probably saved me from making a very expensive mistake." Another told me, "I hope I can build something half as successful as what you did." Driving home that evening, I felt something I had not felt in years. Useful. Not rich. Not important. Useful. The next Sunday, I mentioned the event during a family dinner. "That is nice, Dad," Emily said without looking up from her phone. Jason smirked. "Motivational speaking now." "Something like that," I replied. "How much did they pay you?" he asked. "That was not really the point." "Everything has a point," Jason said. "Especially money." The conversation moved on. Nobody asked another question. Nobody seemed interested. Yet later that night, Olivia sent me a text message. I looked up the event online. That was pretty cool, Grandpa. That simple message meant more than she probably realized. Around the same time, another opportunity appeared. A larger company approached me about consulting on a commercial development project outside Fort Worth. I was retired. I did not need the money. But the work interested me. The challenge interested me. For the first time in years, I considered saying yes to something just because I wanted to. When Emily heard about it, her reaction surprised me. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "Because I enjoy it. You already worked your whole life." "That does not mean I stopped being capable." She exchanged a quick glance with Jason. I noticed it immediately. "Seems like a lot of effort at your age," Jason said. Normally, I would have laughed it off. Normally, I would have changed the subject. This time I did not. "My age has never stopped me before," I said calmly. The table went quiet for a moment. It was a small thing. A very small thing. But it was the first time in years that I did not immediately retreat. The first time I did not make everyone else comfortable at my own expense. Jason gave a tight smile and took a sip of his drink. "Whatever makes you happy." But there was something different in his voice. Something I could not quite place. Over the next month, I started noticing more of those looks between him and Emily. More private conversations that ended when I entered a room. More questions about my schedule, my finances, and my future plans. At first I ignored it. Then one evening Olivia called me sounding nervous. "Grandpa," she said quietly, "I think there is something you need to know about Mom and Jason." And the moment I heard those words, I knew a storm was coming. I did not answer Olivia right away. Something in her voice told me she had spent days deciding whether to make that call. "What is it?" I asked. There was a long pause. "Promise you will not tell them I said anything." My stomach tightened. "I promise." She exhaled slowly. "Mom and Jason have been talking about your house." I leaned back in my chair. Talking about it how? Like it already belongs to them. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Olivia continued. "A few weeks ago, I walked into the kitchen and heard Jason saying they should convince you to move into a retirement community." "A retirement community?" I asked quietly. "He said it would be easier to manage your finances." I looked out my window toward the backyard Margaret and I had spent years building together. The rose bushes she planted were still there. The oak tree we bought when it was barely taller than me was now towering over the fence. The idea that someone else was discussing what should happen to my home without even asking me felt strangely personal. "Did your mother say anything?" I asked. Olivia hesitated. She did not stop him. After we ended the call, I sat alone for a long time. The next few weeks were uncomfortable. Once you see a pattern, it becomes impossible to ignore it. Suddenly, I noticed conversations that had never bothered me before. Emily started asking questions she had never asked. "Dad, have you updated your estate planning recently?" "Dad, what are your long-term plans for the house?" "Dad, have you thought about downsizing?" The questions always sounded casual. The timing never did. Then Michael joined in. One evening, he called me while I was driving home from Fort Worth. "Dad, Emily says you are considering selling the house." I nearly missed my turn. "What?" That is what she heard. I have never said that. Silence followed. "Really?" he asked. "Really?" That was when I realized something important. Information was moving through the family. The problem was that none of it was coming from me. Somehow stories were spreading, assumptions were becoming facts, and nobody seemed interested in checking whether any of it was true. A month later, I attended Olivia's birthday dinner. During dessert, Jason casually raised his glass. "To family planning ahead." Everyone smiled politely. Then he looked directly at me. "The smartest thing people can do is simplify their lives before someone else has to do it for them." A few heads nodded around the table. Emily nodded too. I felt every eye briefly drift toward me. It was subtle, almost invisible, but I saw it. The narrative had already been built. I was the aging father who needed guidance. The aging father whose future needed managing. The aging father who should probably step aside. Driving home that night, I finally understood how far things had gone. This was no longer about money. It was about control. The shocking part was how many people seemed to believe the story. Then came the moment that truly rattled me. A few days later, an attorney I had known for years called unexpectedly. "Bill," he said, "I thought you should know something." "What is it?" Someone contacted my office asking general questions about family asset transfers. My grip tightened on the phone. "Who?" There was a pause. I probably should not say. I already knew the answer before he spoke again. And when I heard the name, it felt like the floor disappeared beneath me. The name was Emily. I sat there staring through my windshield after the call ended, unable to start the engine. Out of everyone, I had expected Jason to push boundaries. I had expected him to ask questions. I had expected him to make assumptions. But hearing that my own daughter had been the one contacting professionals about family assets without ever speaking to me directly felt different. It felt heavier. That evening I called her. The phone rang 4 times before she answered. "Hi, Dad." Her voice sounded perfectly normal. "Emily, can we talk?" There was a pause. "Sure. Have you been discussing my finances with other people?" Silence. Then a nervous laugh. "Where is this coming from?" "It is a simple question." Another pause. "Dad, everybody talks about family planning." "That is not what I asked." Her tone hardened slightly. "Jason and I are just trying to be responsible." Responsible. I kept thinking about that word after the call ended. Over the next few weeks, I tried everything I could think of to repair whatever was happening. I sent Emily a long email explaining how uncomfortable I felt. I chose every word carefully. I did not accuse anyone. I did not mention the attorney. I simply told her I wanted honesty. 2 days later, I received a 3-sentence reply. "You are overthinking things. Nobody is trying to hurt you. We love you." That was it. No explanation. No conversation. Nothing. I tried Michael next. We met for lunch at a barbecue restaurant outside Dallas. Halfway through the meal, I asked him directly, "Do you think I am incapable of managing my own affairs?" He looked surprised. "No." "Then why does everyone keep talking about my future like I am not in the room?" Michael stared down at his plate. "Dad, people are just trying to help." I nodded slowly. It was the same answer. Different person. Same answer. A week later, I mailed handwritten letters to both of my children. Real letters. The kind people used to write before every difficult conversation became a text message. In those letters, I talked about family, about Margaret, about trust, about how important it was to speak honestly before misunderstandings became permanent. Neither letter received a response. Not a call, not an email, not even a text. What I did receive were more strange conversations. Emily began asking whether I had considered selling the property outside Dallas. Jason casually mentioned retirement communities again during a family gathering. Someone else asked whether I planned to simplify my investment portfolio. The questions came from different directions, but they all felt connected. Then Olivia called me one evening. "Grandpa, are you okay?" she asked. "Why?" "Because everybody keeps talking about you." My chest tightened. "Talking about me how?" "Like you were struggling." I closed my eyes. "Struggling with what?" "Nobody ever says." Her voice dropped lower. "They just keep saying they are worried about you." That was the moment everything clicked into place. A story had been created. Not one big lie. Something more dangerous. 100 small suggestions. 100 assumptions repeated often enough that they started sounding true. Nobody was attacking me directly. Nobody had to. They were quietly redefining me. Every conversation pushed me a little further from being a respected father and a little closer to being a problem that needed solving. The worst part was realizing how many people seemed willing to believe it. I stopped calling as often. Fewer invitations arrived. Group texts continued without me. Family dinners happened that I learned about afterward. For the first time in my life, I felt like a guest looking through the window of my own family. And one night, sitting alone in the house Margaret and I built together, I looked around the silent living room and realized something painful. Nobody was trying to understand me anymore. They were trying to manage me. And I had never felt more alone. The lowest point did not arrive with an argument. It arrived with silence. That was what surprised me. I always assumed heartbreak would be loud. Instead, it sounded like an empty house at 7 o'clock on a Sunday evening. For years, Sundays had been family days. There was always a call, a visit, a reason to gather. Then one Sunday passed without a single message. Then another. I told myself everyone was busy. By the 3rd week, even I stopped believing that. One afternoon, I found myself standing in the garage looking at Margaret's old gardening gloves hanging from a hook near the workbench. She had been gone 5 years, but sometimes I could still picture her walking through the backyard carrying a watering can. "You worry too much, Bill," she used to tell me. "People show you who they are. You just have to pay attention." Back then I thought she was talking about business. Sitting alone in that garage, I realized she had been talking about life. A few days later I called Emily. The phone went to voicemail. I left a message. "Hi, sweetheart. Just wanted to check in. Give me a call when you have time." No response. 3 days later, I sent a text. Hope everything is okay. Still nothing. Eventually, she replied with 4 words. Busy week. Talk later. That was it. Michael was not much different. When I called, he sounded distracted. Everything okay? I asked. Yeah, Dad. Just a lot going on. I understand. I will call you soon. The call lasted less than 2 minutes. He never called back. What hurt was not the distance itself. Families go through seasons. What hurt was realizing I had spent years making excuses for behavior I would never have accepted from anyone else. One evening, Olivia came by after class. She found me sitting on the back porch watching the sunset. You look tired, she said. I smiled. I am 74. Tired is part of the package. She laughed softly and sat beside me. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she asked, Are you lonely? It was such a simple question. I could have lied. Instead, I nodded. Sometimes. She looked down at her hands. I am sorry. You do not have anything to apologize for. We sat there until the sky turned dark. Before leaving, she hugged me and said something I will never forget. Grandpa, just because people stop seeing your value does not mean you lost it. After she left, I stayed on that porch for another hour thinking about those words. For months, I had focused on what my family was doing, what they were saying, what they believed. For the first time, I started asking a different question. Why was I allowing other people to define my worth? That realization did not solve anything overnight. The house was still quiet. The distance was still there. The disappointment was still real. But something shifted. I stopped waiting for someone else to fix what they had broken. The next morning, I called my attorney. Then I called my financial advisor. By lunchtime, I had scheduled meetings with both. And as I hung up the phone, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Not anger, not sadness, clarity. And that clarity was about to change everything. The meetings with my attorney and financial advisor lasted less than 2 hours, but they changed the direction of my life. Not because of any dramatic decision, because for the first time in years, every conversation was about what I wanted. My attorney looked across the conference table and asked, Bill, what do you actually want your next 10 years to look like? I remember laughing softly. You know, nobody has asked me that in a long time. Afterward, I drove home through downtown Dallas with the windows down, and something felt different. The problems had not disappeared. My family had not suddenly changed. But I was no longer sitting still waiting for them to decide who I was. A few weeks later, I accepted the consulting project outside Fort Worth. The work was supposed to be part-time. It quickly became much more than that. 3 mornings a week, I drove to the development site before sunrise. The smell of fresh lumber, concrete, and dirt reminded me of my younger years. One morning, a project manager named Chris walked beside me as we reviewed blueprints. How many of these projects have you done? He asked. Enough to know where the mistakes usually happen. He laughed. Then you are exactly who we need. Small conversations like that started adding up. People listened when I spoke. People asked questions. People valued experience instead of treating it like an inconvenience. One afternoon, I caught myself smiling during a meeting. It had been a while since that happened naturally. At home, I started making changes too. I cleaned out rooms that had been untouched since Margaret passed away. I repaired a fence that had been leaning for years. I joined a local business mentoring group and spent time helping younger entrepreneurs avoid mistakes I had made decades earlier. One of them, a woman named Rachel, called me after securing her first major contract. Bill, I wanted you to be the first person I told. That is wonderful news. I could not have done it without your advice. After we hung up, I sat quietly in my office. It struck me how strange life could be. Complete strangers were showing more appreciation than some of the people closest to me. Meanwhile, communication with my family remained distant. Birthdays came and went. Group messages continued without much involvement from me. But something important had changed. I was no longer chasing their attention. I was building a life that existed whether they approved of it or not. Olivia noticed the difference first. She stopped by one Saturday afternoon and looked around my office. New project folders covered the desk. Notes were pinned to the wall. A construction model sat near the window. You seem happier, she said. I think I am busier. That is not the same thing. I smiled. Maybe not. She pointed at the stack of project documents. Looks like somebody is unretiring. Do not tell anybody. I have a reputation to protect. She laughed. It was the kind of easy laughter that had become rare in my life. As the months passed, new opportunities kept appearing. More consulting offers. More speaking invitations. More people reaching out. Then one evening, I received a call from a luxury resort in Las Vegas. They wanted me to attend an industry event and speak on a panel. As I listened to the details, I had no idea that invitation would eventually place me at the same table where everything would finally come to a head. But looking back now, that phone call was the first sign that the future had plans none of us could see yet. The event in Las Vegas turned out to be much bigger than I expected. When I arrived at the resort, there were hundreds of attendees from construction, real estate, and development companies across the country. The conference badge waiting for me at registration stopped me for a second. Under my name it read, William Harrison, Industry Advisor and Guest Speaker. It was just a piece of plastic hanging from a lanyard, but after everything that had happened, seeing my name attached to something I had earned felt meaningful. Nobody handed it to me out of sympathy. Nobody gave it to me because of family connections. It represented decades of work. On the morning of the panel discussion, I stood backstage with 3 executives from national firms. One of them extended his hand. Bill Harrison? He asked. That is me. His face lit up. I have wanted to meet you for years. My first supervisor used to tell stories about projects you managed back in the 90s. I laughed. Hopefully the good stories. The very good ones. Throughout the conference, conversations like that kept happening. People recognized my work. People remembered lessons I had taught decades earlier. More importantly, they listened when I spoke. During one session, a young project manager asked, "What is the biggest mistake leaders make?" I thought about it for a moment. Confusing control with respect, I answered. The room grew quiet. You can control people for a while. Respect lasts much longer. Several people wrote the answer down. Later that afternoon, the conference organizer approached me. Bill, would you be interested in helping us design next year's leadership program? I smiled. You are asking a 74-year-old retiree to help run a leadership program? No, she said. I am asking one of the most experienced people in the room. That sentence stayed with me. Not because it flattered me, because it reminded me of something I had forgotten. Experience is not a burden. It is an asset. Wisdom is not something that expires. It becomes more valuable when it is shared. Back home in Texas, the consulting projects continued growing. More invitations arrived. More opportunities appeared. My calendar became busier than it had been in years. One afternoon, Olivia visited my office and noticed a framed photo sitting beside the conference badge. You kept it? She asked. Apparently, I am sentimental. She smiled. No, I think you are finally proud of yourself again. Her words caught me off guard. Maybe she was right. Not proud in an arrogant way. Proud in the sense that I had stopped apologizing for existing. Stopped shrinking myself to make other people comfortable. Stopped pretending my life was over simply because I had reached a certain age. Around that same time, something else happened. The distance with my family remained, but it no longer controlled my mood. If they called, I answered. If they did not, I continued living. The strange thing was that the less I chased their approval, the more clearly I could see the situation for what it was. For years, I had been measuring my value through their reactions. Now I was measuring it through my actions. Then, several months after that conference, my phone rang. It was Emily. Her voice sounded unusually cheerful. Dad, I have an idea, she said. The whole family should take a trip together. I stared out the window of my office toward the Dallas skyline. Something about her tone immediately caught my attention. A family trip? I asked. Yes, she replied. Everybody together. It will be special. Looking back now, that call was the bridge between the life I had rebuilt and the night that would change everything. Because that trip would take us straight to the restaurant where every hidden assumption, every quiet expectation, and every carefully crafted illusion would finally come into the open. When the family trip finally arrived, I already knew something had changed. Not in them, in me. A year earlier, I would have walked into that weekend hoping everyone would reconnect, hoping old wounds would heal themselves. This time I walked in with clear eyes. The resort was beautiful. Glass walls overlooked the Las Vegas Strip. The lobby smelled faintly of fresh flowers and expensive cologne. Everyone seemed excited. Emily was taking photos. Michael was talking about sports. The grandchildren were exploring every corner of the property. On the surface, it looked like the kind of family gathering people post online and describe as perfect. But I noticed little things. The same things I had learned to notice over the past year. During check-in, Jason somehow ended up speaking for everyone. At dinner reservations, he made decisions before anyone else answered. When activities were discussed, people naturally looked toward him first. Months earlier that would have bothered me. Now I simply observed. The difference was that I no longer felt the need to compete for space in a room. I already knew who I was. The second evening, we gathered for dinner at one of the resort's most exclusive restaurants. White tablecloths, floor-to-ceiling windows, crystal chandeliers hanging overhead. The kind of place where every server moved with practiced precision. As we were seated, Jason glanced around and smiled. Now this is how a family dinner should look. Everyone nodded. I noticed something else. Nobody asked about prices. Nobody looked at the menu with concern. Expensive appetizers appeared. Premium steaks arrived. Bottles of wine were ordered without hesitation. Watching it unfold felt strangely familiar. Not because of the food, because of the assumptions underneath it. Halfway through dinner, Michael leaned back and said, "This place is incredible." Emily smiled. "Best family trip we have had in years." Olivia quietly looked toward me from across the table. For a moment our eyes met. She seemed to sense something. Not danger, not anger, just awareness. Jason spent most of the evening telling stories. Talking about business. Talking about success. Talking about leadership. The conversation revolved around him so naturally that nobody seemed to notice. At one point he raised his glass. "You know what makes a family strong?" he asked. Several people looked his way. Confidence. Somebody willing to step up and take charge. A few heads nodded. He continued talking while I sat quietly listening. The strange thing was that I felt completely calm. Months earlier, I would have been hurt by some of these comments. Now I felt detached from them, like I was watching a movie where I already knew the ending. As dessert arrived, I noticed the restaurant manager approach our section. He spoke briefly with one of the servers, then disappeared again. A few minutes later, another server placed a small black folder on a side station near the wall. Nobody else seemed to notice it. I did. The room suddenly felt very still. Jason was in the middle of another story. Emily was laughing. Michael was checking something on his phone. Olivia looked uncomfortable for reasons I suspected she could not fully explain. Then the waiter began walking toward our table carrying that black folder. Every conversation around me seemed to fade into the background. Because after everything that had happened over the past year, I knew the next few minutes were about to reveal more truth than anyone at that table was prepared to see. The waiter stopped beside the table and smiled politely. "Whenever you are ready, sir." Then he placed the black folder directly in front of Jason. That single movement changed the atmosphere instantly. Jason blinked. "Me?" The waiter nodded. "Yes, sir." For the first time all evening, Jason looked uncertain. He opened the folder and stared down at the receipt. The confidence disappeared from his face so quickly it was almost unsettling. Emily leaned closer. "What is it?" Jason did not answer. He just kept staring. Finally, Michael reached across the table. "How bad can it be?" Jason turned the receipt toward him. Michael's eyebrows shot up. The total was just over $12,000. Nobody spoke. The restaurant suddenly felt very quiet. Jason forced a laugh. "Good one." He looked directly at me. "They brought it to the wrong person." I took a sip of water. "Did they?" Another silence settled over the table. Emily shifted in her chair. "Dad." I set my glass down carefully. "Yes. The check usually comes to you." Her voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it. "Usually," I agreed. Jason leaned back and laughed again, though this time it sounded strained. "Okay." Everybody had their fun. He pushed the folder toward me. "Here you go." I did not touch it. "Why would I take it?" His smile faded. "Because it is the family dinner." And he stared at me. Around the table, people began exchanging nervous glances. I remained completely calm. "I thought this trip was about celebrating family," I said. "It is," Emily replied. "Good. Then everyone should contribute." Michael frowned. "Dad, what is going on?" "Nothing is going on." I folded my hands on the table. "I simply believe adults should be responsible for their own decisions." Jason's expression hardened. "You invited us here." "Actually," I replied, "I was invited." That landed harder than I expected. Emily looked confused. "What do you mean?" "This resort invited me months ago for a professional event." Nobody said a word. I continued. "The family vacation was added afterward." Olivia lowered her eyes, hiding a small smile. Jason shifted in his chair. "That still does not explain this." "Explain what?" "The check." I looked around the table. For the first time all evening, everyone was paying attention. "The check is simple. The people who ordered the dinner can pay for the dinner." Michael slowly shook his head. Dad, this is unlike you. Perhaps. I glanced toward the window, overlooking the lights of Las Vegas. Or perhaps you never noticed what I was doing before. Emily looked genuinely uncomfortable now. Dad, nobody expected. She stopped herself before finishing the sentence. That was the moment. The moment she realized she had almost said exactly what everyone had been thinking. Nobody expected to pay. Nobody expected to ask. Nobody expected to discuss it. They had simply assumed. Jason crossed his arms. You are making a big deal out of nothing. Am I? I asked quietly. Yes. I nodded. Interesting. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and placed a conference badge on the table. The same badge I had worn earlier that week. The title beneath my name was clearly visible under the restaurant lights. Industry advisor. Guest speaker. Executive consultant. One by one, their eyes moved from the badge to me. Nobody had asked why I was at the resort. Nobody had asked what I had been doing for the past year. Nobody had asked because they thought they already knew who I was. The problem was that the version of me they believed in no longer existed. Emily stared at the badge. Michael stared at the badge. Even Jason looked rattled. Then Olivia quietly broke the silence. Grandpa has been doing pretty well lately. Nobody responded. Because for the first time that night, they were beginning to realize just how much they did not know. Nobody reached for a menu. Nobody touched a glass. The energy at the table had changed completely. Jason looked down at the receipt again, as if the number might somehow shrink if he stared long enough. It did not. Emily was the first to speak. Dad, why did you never tell us about any of this? Her voice was softer now, not defensive, confused. I looked at her for a moment. You never asked. That answer seemed to hit harder than anything else I had said all evening. Michael leaned forward. You have been consulting this whole time. Yes. For how long? Long enough to build a life I enjoy. Jason cleared his throat. Nobody is saying you cannot do that. I turned toward him. No. Nobody said it directly. Silence followed. The waiter discreetly stepped away, giving us privacy. Around us, the restaurant continued operating normally, while our table felt suspended in time. Emily looked down at the conference badge again. Why did Olivia know? Olivia immediately looked uncomfortable. Because she visited, I said before she could answer. She called. She asked questions. She showed interest in my life. Nobody had a response ready for that. The truth has a way of doing that. It does not need volume. It simply needs space. Michael rubbed his forehead. Dad, I think maybe we all got busy. Perhaps. I nodded. But being busy does not explain assumptions. Emily slowly looked up. Her eyes met mine. For the first time in a long while, I saw something other than certainty there. I saw doubt. What assumptions? She asked quietly. I folded my hands together. The assumption that I would always pay. The assumption that I would always say yes. The assumption that my life would remain exactly where you left it while yours continued moving forward. Nobody interrupted. Jason shifted in his chair again. You are making this sound worse than it is. Am I? I asked calmly. Then I reached into my jacket and removed a folded document. I had not planned to show it, but something told me the moment had arrived. It was a summary prepared by my attorney after months of meetings and planning. Nothing dramatic. Nothing secret. Just facts. I placed it on the table. Michael picked it up first. His eyes widened slightly as he read. Then he handed it to Emily. She read more slowly. Much more slowly. The document outlined the charitable foundation I had recently established, the mentorship programs I had agreed to support, and the educational trust one had created. None of those decisions had appeared out of nowhere. They came from months of conversations with advisors, community leaders, and organizations I had been working alongside. The future everyone assumed had already been decided without me had never existed. I had been building a different future the entire time. Emily looked up. You already made all these decisions? Yes. Without talking to us. I held her gaze. For the same reason nobody discussed my future with me. The words were not angry. They were simply true. That was what made them difficult. Jason looked away first. Michael looked exhausted. Olivia remained quiet. The only sound was the faint music playing somewhere in the restaurant. Then Emily asked a question that revealed more than she realized. Where does that leave us? I looked around the table at my family. The people I loved. The people who had disappointed me. The people who still did not fully understand how much damage assumptions could cause. That, I said carefully, depends on what happens after tonight. And for the first time all evening, nobody seemed certain what would come next. The rest of that evening ended quietly. There were no dramatic speeches, no sudden transformations, no perfect apologies. Life rarely works that way. The bill was eventually paid, though not in the way anyone had expected when they sat down at that table. More importantly, something far more significant had been settled. For the first time in years, everyone understood that my life was not standing still waiting for their plans. It belonged to me. The weeks that followed were uncomfortable at first. Emily called several times. Some conversations were awkward. Some were emotional. A few ended in silence. But for the first time, we were speaking honestly. Not perfectly. Honestly. There is a difference. Michael began reaching out more often too. Not to ask for anything. Just to talk. Sometimes about work. Sometimes about football. Sometimes about nothing important at all. Those were my favorite conversations. Jason remained distant for a while. I think reality arrived differently for him than it did for everyone else. When people build assumptions over a long period of time, it can be difficult to accept that those assumptions were never true. But that was no longer my burden to carry. One of the most important lessons I learned through all of this was that boundaries are not punishments. Healthy boundaries are acts of respect. They protect relationships from becoming transactions. They protect love from becoming entitlement. And they protect people from losing themselves while trying to keep everyone else happy. Today my life looks different. The consulting work continues. The mentorship programs continue. The foundation continues growing. I spend time with people who value my presence rather than my usefulness. I still see my family. I still love my family. But love no longer requires me to abandon myself. That lesson took me 74 years to learn. Looking back, I do not think the deepest wound came from assumptions about money. I think the deepest wound came from slowly allowing other people to define my value. The healing began the moment I stopped giving them that power. If you are listening to this right now and you feel overlooked, underestimated, dismissed, or forgotten, I want to tell you something from the bottom of my heart. Your value does not decrease because someone fails to recognize it. Your worth is not determined by who calls, who visits, who approves, or who understands your journey. Sometimes the people closest to us only see the version of us that benefits them. That does not mean it is the only version that exists. Protect your finances. Protect your peace. Protect your emotional well-being. Ask difficult questions. Pay attention to actions more than promises. And never be afraid to rebuild your life, even if you have to do it later than you expected. I also learned to trust something I had ignored for too long: intuition. That quiet voice inside us often notices the truth long before our minds are ready to accept it. Mine did. I just needed the courage to listen. These days, every morning begins the same way. I sit on my back porch in Dallas with a cup of coffee and watch the sunrise move across the yard Margaret loved so much. The rose bushes still bloom. The old oak tree still stands. And hanging in my garage is the same red toolbox my father gave me when I was 12 years old. The paint is faded now. The corners are worn. But it remains exactly where it has always been. Whenever I see it, I remember something my father taught me a lifetime ago. Take care of your tools. Take care of your word. And I would add one more thing. Take care of your self-respect. My name is William Harrison. I am 74 years old. And the core lesson I want to leave with you is this: never surrender your worth to people who only recognize your value when they need something from you. Thank you for spending this time with me and allowing me to share my story. If any part of it spoke to your heart, I hope it reminded you that you are not alone in what you are carrying. There are more people out there fighting quiet battles than most of us will ever know. Be kind to yourself. Be patient with your healing. And keep moving forward. If you would like, leave a comment and share where you are watching from. I always enjoy reading your stories as well. And if you enjoy family drama stories that explore resilience, boundaries, and unexpected moments of truth, there are many more journeys waiting for you in this channel's playlist. Some begin with heartbreak. Some begin with betrayal. But all of them lead somewhere meaningful. Whenever you are ready, I hope you will join me for the next story. Until then, take care of yourself, trust your instincts, and remember that the people who truly value you never need to be convinced of your worth.